Hello again. Welcome back to episode 8 of Buddha Bites. I'm Iris. A couple of days ago, we commemorated the birthday anniversary of my father. He would have turned 95 today. And he was a vegetarian for the second half of his life, give or take a few years. And so in commemorating his life, I was trying to think, well, I'd like to make a vegetarian dish. So I'm thinking, what would be a great dish to show you? I recently needed to make a dish for a dinner party, an appetizer, and I didn't have a lot of time to cook and I didn't have a lot of time to shop. So I had to really basically go through my kitchen and see what pantry items I had, and what resulted was the dish that I'm about to show you. It is a great appetizer. It just takes minutes to make, minutes in the oven. Let's go make it. So today we are going to make a puff pastry appetizer with caramelized onion, apple, and blue cheese. Now, we have to start with the puff pastry because it needs some time to defrost. You know how not long ago we were talking about the supply chain issues with cream? Well, I discovered recently that there is a supply chain issue with puff pastry of all things. I have no idea why. So I struggled to find the puff pastry that I was looking for when all most stores had were these shells. I bought some shells, but I don't really want to use them. They're not really great for this application. So I'm going to figure out what to do with these. Watch this space and I'll tell you what I come up with. Now, what I was looking for, which I eventually found, thank goodness, were these puff pastry shells. They come in a box of 2. So after I've made one, I always have one handy. So these are great. This is what I ended up using, but I almost didn't find that. What I did do was I went to Whole Foods and I found this puff pastry, the Dufour Pastry Kitchen's classic puff pastry. It's fine, I've used it before. It is really expensive, really expensive. The only reason why I was able to get it at a halfway decent price, and I mean like $9 was because I'm a Prime member and it was on sale. But I have this just in case. I bought it when I thought I wasn't going to be able to find the Pepperidge Farm. What I also found at Whole Foods, next to the puff pastry that I just showed you, was this plant-based pastry dough. I don't know what it can do. I'm imagining that it is supposed to be like a vegan version of a puff pastry. So since my brother is a vegan, I'm going to figure out what to do with this. Again, watch this space. Now, we take this out. I'm going to show you what we do. The instructions are that you take them out. They are sort of tri-folded when you first get them, and you're supposed to sit them on a countertop at room temperature for about 30 to 40 minutes and let them get soft and unfold them. Now, you can't let them sit too long past 40 minutes. You want to get going on working on them right away. So this is ready to go. It still has some folds in it, but that's fine. So what we're going to do is to come over to the cutting board. We're going to dust it very lightly with some flour so that we can roll it out. Now, before we get too much into it, this is one of these what is this gadget things. This is a single-use gadget. If you've seen it before and not known what it is, this is what it's supposed to do. You're supposed to pinch it, put it in flour, and then use it to sprinkle flour. Now, you decide for yourself whether it's worth the money. I kind of like it, but I hardly ever use it. You see, the first thing that I did was I just put my hands right in and sprinkled. So for me, not necessarily necessary, but cute. Anyway, so we have a light dusting of flour on the surface. We're going to come back around and get our thawed puff pastry. We are going to lightly ease it onto the surface. And I kept these, which were between the trifolds, just to further ease my ability to get it off the surface, I think I'm gonna flip it over and maybe put a tiny little bit. You really don't need that much flour on this, just enough to be able to roll this out. And I've actually made this appetizer not rolling it out at all, but if you roll it out, you get a few more portions of it. So I am going to take my rolling pin and just very gently stretch it out just a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, I think I might turn it around a little bit, maybe just a quarter turn, and see how much of a perfect square I can get. And if I don't, again, this is sort of rustic. Now, I made this recipe the first time when I was auditioning for America's Test Kitchen. They had this cooking competition, and I was told by the casting director that I needed to come up with 10 dishes that I was taking pictures of, and I had no time to really figure out what my strategy was. So I ran to the store, I bought a bunch of different ingredients, and this is how this dish came about. So we have ourselves a nice sort of a square, and we are going to transfer it to this baking sheet. Now, before we do, the baking sheet really needs to be lined. I line mine with parchment. So I have parchment that comes out of a roll. These are notoriously difficult to get to stay put on a baking sheet. Here's the trick. Once you have cut it to size, ball it up, unball it up. Take your baking sheet. It's going to lie flat right on it. So let's take this. I'm going to tuck it under a little bit. And this is delicate, but it does have a little bit of give, so don't worry about how to transfer it. It's going to be fine. And as you see, it is fine. And it's actually the perfect size for our appetizer. Now, ordinarily, I want to cut on a cutting board, but if you try to cut this on the cutting board, you're going to have a really hard time getting it on the baking sheet. So there are a couple of different tools you can use. Another wonderful tool. This is called a mezzaluna, a half moon. It is an Italian tool. And you can take this and make cuts like this. I mean, it's cute. But in case you don't have a mezzaluna, and that's most of us, I only recently got my mezzaluna, I think last year. And I frankly don't use it a lot. It is awfully sharp. It can be very dangerous, and you want to always keep it in the sleeve that it comes in. So, just to give you an option, but perfectly fine is the option to just use a serrated knife. And this is okay because I'm not sawing into this. I'm just making impressions. And the serrated knife actually makes sort of a nice little design, but it's going to be covered up by the stuff that we put on it. So we're just going to make a few impressions just because it makes it easier once this is cooked to pull out the individual appetizers. So that's why we score this a little bit. It's not like a cut, but it's scored just so that it's easier to pull apart once the puff pastry is done. And again, it does not have to be perfect. This is far from perfect. So we take this, we're going to set it aside for a little bit, and we're going to get started on the onions. Now, this makes use of caramelized onions. And so we start with really whatever onion you like. I happen to have the purple onions. Previously, when I was preparing this for the one that I'm going to show you at the end of this video, I had Vidalia onions. So it's really just a matter of what you like and what you have. Now, we've done knife skills before. We've cut an onion before. This is a slightly different cut. I like to give you different options. You don't need to dice things up. You want to get this onion as thin as possible. It doesn't need to be as small a dice as possible. It doesn't need to be a dice at all. It just needs to be thin slices. So as I showed you before, you just take off the top layer that has the onion paper that is difficult to deal with. You discard that. So instead of what we've done before, which is to make the scores this way and then you turn it and make dice, all you have to do is to just slice it lengthwise. And you see that I'm using my nakiri, my Japanese knife that was made specifically for precision cuts for vegetables. Now, once you get toward the end and you start to feel uneasy, as I have said before, just flip the thing. I guess I have like one more cut that I could feel comfortable with. And this is so long as it gets to a nice thin slice. When you caramelize onions, it takes a really long time. It can take up to 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the onions that you use. So that's why you want them to be as thin as possible, so that truly, when they say melt in your mouth, they melt in your mouth and they also melt on the pastry. So we've gotten to the bottom of this, so we're gonna finish it out. And I wanted to let you know that the other benefit of having an extremely sharp knife is that I'm not crying. When you have a dull knife, it's more likely that you're gonna cry because the cuts are not clean and they release those vapors that will get in your eyes and make you cry. So that's one trick to not crying while you cut an onion. Make sure that you have a super sharp knife. The other one, which I'm not following right now, is to keep your mouth shut and not talk. And that will keep you also from crying sometimes. Now, we don't need to use these because I already have caramelized onions, but I did want to show you the trick to getting them to the state where they get caramelized. And now I want to show you what the result was. So I started out with 2 large Vidalia onions. They filled the entire surface of this cast iron skillet. This is what it was reduced to. I mixed it with garlic, a little bit of salt and pepper, and you see how you can't even really see the definition of the onion. You know that it's onion because it smells so fragrant, but you really can't see the definition. That is what you want. And this took me, with these Vidalia onions, about a half an hour. And this was what I did previously. So we're just going to add that to our caramelized onions, and they are going to be ready to go on the pastry. So let's come on back over. And I'd like to introduce you to a term called mise en place. It is a French term that means that you get all of your ingredients together before you actually use them. So this was the first part of the mise en place, is our lovely caramelized onions. The next is going to be apple. Now, this apple, I like to use Granny Smith because with this particular dish, we're talking about a combination of different types of flavor profiles. And so the caramelized onion is very savory and it's a little on the sweet side for an onion, but the apple gives us the nice crunch that has been totally cooked out of these. And it also gives you a nice tartness that is a good contrast. Now, I have a microplane. This is an OXO microplane. It did not cost me that much. I'm sure it cost me under $20. Frankly, I don't remember how much. It has a dial where you can control the thickness of the slices, and it also has this guard if you are cutting something that you could potentially hurt yourself. I'm not going to use the guard right now because the apple, which I have washed, is big enough that if I were to put the guard on, it would just be unwieldy. So we're just going to make some very thin cuts of apple. You see how thin these come out? I can't tell you, I'm not good with millimeters, but let's just say this is about as thin as the microplane goes. We're just going to do a few more of these. And this is more than enough for what we're about to do. So I'm going to take these thin slices and stack them up. And you may recall, we want to get these slices to correspond with the bite size that we cut the puff pastry. So we're just going to take this, maybe quarter them a little bit. I'll just make a few more cuts, stacking them up as neatly as I can. You can do this with a chef's knife, but this is one of those cases where you might as well just use the tools that are created to make your life easier. And that is what I have, so that's what I'm going to use. So to our mise en place, we're going to add these apples. Now, we really don't have to worry so much about the color because these are going to go in the oven. But if for some reason you were concerned and you wanted them to keep their color, maybe not necessarily for this dish, but for some other dish down the line, you just take your trusty lemon. You should just keep lemons around all the time. And the lemon will keep the apples from turning brown while they sit waiting to be used on your mise en place. So we have our apples ready to go. We have a little snack for the chef. And then we go to blue cheese. Now, I came here fully prepared today to pontificate about the virtues of getting the better ingredient. And pontificating would be perfect for my father because one of my brothers called him the pontiff for a little while. That's another story altogether. I went to the grocery store and got 6 ounces of this gorgonzola cheese that was already crumbled. 6 ounces for $7.99. 6 ounces. And you see that it's already crumbled and ready to go. Now, the reason why they can sell it crumbled like this is, and I'm going to just put the top on it for now, is that this gorgonzola, when they put it in the package, when they process it, a lot of times they use cellulose so that it stays relatively clump free. Now, this particular brand, Boar's Head, uses potato flour, which made it like this. Now again, 6 ounces, $7.99. Now, went to Trader Joe's, got a triangle, 8 ounces of this gorgonzola that came all in one piece. I've used parts of it already and I've crumbled parts of it already. And this 8 ounces was $3.97. So one would suggest that this is the better way to go. Certainly it's the cheaper way to go. But once you see the results, you will note that there are going to be some decisions that you have to make as to which of these you choose to use. And you cannot make a bad decision. So we will leave that in the mise en place, and we are going to preheat the oven to 400 degrees and go on. Now, we have the sort of sweet savory profile. We have the slightly sour crunchy profile. We have the almost gamey quality of blue cheese with a little bit of the sourness. What do we balance that with? Well, I decided, and I happened to have in my pantry when I was trying to come up with this dish, I had apricot preserves. And I thought that would be a nice foil for all these other flavors. So you take a couple, I would say, I was going to say heaping teaspoons full, but this is really more like heaping tablespoons full. And I break up the thickness of it with a little bit of water, just a little by little, just to get the consistency that I want. Doesn't affect the flavor, but it certainly helps you to have a spreadable consistency. And this is actually going to be a nice base upon which to lay the other ingredients that we just put together. So that's a pretty decent consistency, maybe a tiny little bit more water, because I am going to be taking this and brushing it on our puff pastry. So I'd say this is a pretty decent consistency, and we can reintroduce our actual puff pastry, which is ready to go right over here. So I'm going to get rid of this for a moment and this for a moment. And we are going to take a brush and brush very lightly our puff pastry. It can take it. Sometimes people will take puff pastry or like phyllo dough, and they will brush it with butter. We already have oil from when we caramelized the onions, so we don't really need any more oil on this puff pastry. And I like the idea of this sweet foil to give a nice sticky base for the other ingredients that are going to go on top of it. So we are almost finished. It's just a beautiful color and a nice texture that is a bed for the rest of the ingredients. And I like this little rogue apricot. So we're going to start with our caramelized onions. Gonna make a little bit of space for them. You have to break them up a little bit. Again, you know, we have talked about this before. Your best ingredients in the kitchen are your hands, especially with something like this, because this sort of a consistency, if you wanted to put it on the pastry with some other instrument other than your hands, it's slightly more difficult to spread around. My hands are my best tool for this. So we're going to initially just put them on here, and once they get on, we're going to spread them out a little bit so that every little piece has a nice little coating of caramelized onion. It takes about, as I mentioned before, anywhere from a half an hour low and slow up to 45 minutes to an hour, depending on your onions, to really get them this caramelized. It is worth the wait because the sweetness, the spreadability, absolutely worth it, worth the effort. And you see, you kind of need a lot of onions to do this job because they break down to so few, but also the flavor concentrates. So we will spread this out as best we can. We're trying not to have too many clumps of our caramelized onion. We'll use it all though. And some of this is going to actually spread in the oven. We will take our apples now and spread them across in the same way. This is not something that takes a tremendous amount of skill. It just takes the patience to deal with the caramelized onion. And these are pretty decent size to where if you spread them out, it's just sort of like making a big old open-faced sandwich. Yeah. And they're nice and thin, which will help them to incorporate with the other ingredients. And it'll also help, look at me. This is almost perfect if I do say so myself. Look at this, I did just the right amount. It'll really help them to incorporate with the other ingredients, and it will help the whole shebang to cook faster. So we're done with the apples, and just to show you, I'm going to use both of these blue cheeses. I'm going to use the Trader Joe's on the left side, just so that you will be able to see. And I did this on the one that I'm going to show you a little bit later too. If you don't have enough blue cheese, you can always crumble this up. It took me a while to like blue cheese. It's an acquired taste. Some people never end up liking it, but this is actually also a good way to introduce people to blue cheese who think that they don't like it because of all those other flavors that it goes with. So that is the Trader Joe's side. And let's balance it out with the boar's head pre-crumbled, which is also relatively creamy, but you see that there's a slight difference. And these have been sitting at room temperature for a little while. And so whatever it was that was keeping this clumpy sort of got absorbed into the cheese a little bit. So this is where you see, at least initially, there really is no wrong way to do this. Use what you can find. I would like to save money at every turn, but I also like the purest ingredients as possible at every turn too. So essentially that is where we end up, but we're not going to stop here because we're going to go back to this apricot. And we are going to dab it onto the top. And if you're concerned about disturbing your beautiful blue cheese, etc., that you arrange so nicely, you can certainly just drizzle it on top like I'm doing now. And it's all going to melt together. And remember that there is more of this apricot. I keep going back and forth between calling it apricot, apricot. I haven't made a decision, and I don't think I have to. So this is almost ready to go into the oven. Now, I do like to add a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. So we are going to do that, just a tiny little bit, just to balance everything out. And our appetizer is ready to go into the oven. So we're going to get this started, and while we do, in fact, I'm going to turn the light on. And I have, as I always have, a swap out for you, because I don't have the editing skills to just sit and have you sit and wait. This was after 10 minutes in the oven. Look at this. Okay, now which one of those cheeses would you choose? This half was the Trader Joe's. You see how it melted? It's a little bit more melty. It's not as sort of crunchy on the top. And the other side is the boar's head. Again, I was all set to tell you that the cheaper way to go, the purer way to go, was the best way to go. Frankly, I kind of like this boar's head side. I do. I don't think that there's anything wrong with this. I love the meltiness of this, but I love the color of this. So again, that is your decision to make. So I'm going to cut this up. We're going to take a little break, and then we're going to eat it. So here you have it. You have a puff pastry with caramelized onions and apples and Vidalia onions. This is just wonderful. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I have been wanting to light into this. And this is finger food, everybody. So caramelized onion, blue cheese. Now this is an appetizer, but it's been a while since I've eaten, so I'm going to take a few. Oh my gosh, I'm so looking forward to this. Let me just put this down here so you can get a better view. And let's take a bite. Bite-sized pieces. So you get the crunch of the puff pastry. You get that sweetness of the caramelized onion and the apricot. That blue cheese comes in and bites you a little bit. This is so delicious. Great appetizer. You know, I could see myself getting up at 2 a.m. and grabbing at this, or maybe even making this breakfast. It's yours. You do what you like. Now, we should pair it with something nice to drink. Now, I have to admit, I am not the wine person among my friends. My friend Toffer is the wine guy. But this Dogajolo, I really like this. This is a Tuscan blend, and it's just available at the liquor store. Sometimes I can get it, sometimes I can't. It is a combination of Chardonnay, Grechetto, which I don't know anything about, Sauvignon Blanc. It's just a really, really nice table wine. And it has the modern day cork, which is the screw top. This, I think, is a delicious blend. Look at this nice golden color to have with our lovely appetizer to start things out. This is really, really wonderful. I hope you try this at home. I hope you tell me what variations you decide to use with this, because again, this was not really a recipe. It was an idea that came from pantry staples. So make this your own. Thank you so much for being with me today. Like, share, subscribe, enjoy. This is Iris Fairfax for Buddha Bites. Please remember, you are the Buddha. Till next time.